Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the second anniversary of the Moral Imperative Initiative. My name is Iyad Abu Moghli, and I am the director of the Faith for Earth Coalition at UNEP. This event is jointly organized by the World Council of Churches, the Joint Learning Initiative, UNEP Finance Initiative, and UNEP Faith for Earth Coalition. Today's event serves as an important update on the appeal for climate responsible banking that we issued on May 9th, 2021. Colleagues, our objectives are clear. We want to increase the awareness of the grave threat posed by the investments in new fossil fuel expansion to the lives of children, youth, and future generations, and to demonstrate the power of bank account holders to stop this threat. We aim to inspire and advance the actions of faith-based actors, their partners, and constituents, and to hold accountable those still financing fossil fuel expansion. The Moral Imperative Initiative is deeply aligned with the objectives of the Summit for the Future that will be held in September of this year. The summit, as well as the Moral Imperative Initiative, are committed to fostering the sustainable development, addressing climate change, and ensuring a just and equitable future for all. By linking our work to the summit, we amplify our collective voice and reinforce the urgent need for a systemic change. The summit's focus on long-term solutions and transformative actions mirrors our commitment to stopping fossil fuel expansion and promoting ethical investment practices. At the heart of our mission is the well-being of children, who are the most affected by the impacts of climate change. The extreme weather events resulting from unchecked fossil fuel use pose direct threats to their health, safety, and future opportunities. Moreover, the psychological burden of living in a world increasingly compromised by climate change weighs heavily on young minds, affecting their mental health and overall development. Faith actors play a pivotal role in influencing the move towards responsible banking. As trusted leaders in their communities, they possess the moral authority and the reach to inspire significant change. Faith actors' actions can guide individuals and institutions to consider the ethical implications of their financial decisions. Moreover, faith-based organizations often have substantial financial resources and investments. By committing to divest from fossil fuels and invest in sustainable alternatives, they set a powerful example for others to follow. Faith actors can also engage with policymakers to influence legislation that supports the transition to a low-carbon economy and holds financial institutions accountable for their environmental impacts. Let us use this occasion to take decisive action towards a brighter, more sustainable future for all, especially for the children whose lives and futures depend on the choices we make today. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce and to welcome Dia Mirza, UNEP's Goodwill Ambassador. Dia is a tireless advocate for environmental sustainability and a leading voice in the fight against climate change, as well as a great supporter of Faith for Earth. Please join me in welcoming Dia to share her insights and inspiration and to lead us through today's program. Dia, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Iyad, so much for this wonderful opportunity. I know I'm going to learn a lot from you and all our speakers today. And I'm so grateful to everyone who's joining us and to see so many who've joined us already. A question that I asked myself when I was approached to do this was, what does banking have to do with children and saving their lives? And it turns out a lot. Many of you may be wondering about it. And just like me, when I was invited to host this event, and today we will hear how climate experts, finance experts, and young people themselves, what the impact of financial choices have on children, young people, and future generations and their survival. And we will witness the special role played by faith actors. There will be two opportunities, of course, to ask questions. I'm sorry we can't make room for more, but we have two opportunities for everyone to ask questions. So please, send your questions in the chat box, and there will be an opportunity for us to share your question or share your observations if you have any about today's event. Please remember to post your questions in the chat box. I want and I hope that we can make this absolutely interactive. So feel free to post your questions. And if there are any questions that remain unanswered, we will connect with you later. The organizers will connect with you later and give you an opportunity to ask the question and, of course, and answer the questions. It's now, of course, the time for us to start this off, and I'm very, very happy to introduce the representative of the World Council of Churches who started this initiative together with UNEP and partners from other faiths. Frederique Seidel is the founder and leader of the Child Rights Program at the WCC in partnership with UNICEF. Frederique, why did the WCC propose this initiative, and why is it so important? Over to you.
Thank you, Dia. Well, yes, some of you may remember in 2020, young people occupied the entrance of a bank in Lausanne, Switzerland, playing tennis. Their goal was to urge Swiss tennis star Roger Federer to end his sponsorship deal with the bank, which invests a lot of money into fossil fuel expansion. First fined, these teenagers appealed, and the Swiss judge ruled in their favor. He confirmed their initiative was a reaction to an imminent danger. At that time, at the World Council of Churches, we had just received the Keeling Curve Prize for the support to children in churches who protect the environment. Teenagers engaged in the WCC Child Rights Program had followed the news about the young people in Lausanne. One of them called me with a certain panic in his voice and said, "Frederique, big organizations' money is fueling the climate crisis, while children like me even miss schools to alert about global warming. Your organization represents over 500 million Christians in 120 countries, and you seem to care about children. Please help." So we started looking for experts and champions who know how to ensure that bank accounts are not fueling the climate crisis. We wrote to Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, and suggested to create a global appeal for climate-responsible financial choices. Guterres brought us together with UNEP experts, and so we developed the 9th of May appeal, supported by Muslim and Jewish partners. The boy from our church was right. Banking is one of the most powerful levers for climate solutions, yet the least utilized. The WCC decided to spread the word because this blind spot brings so solid hope for children's future.
Wow, that's fantastic. And as a bank user, I would never have, thought or paused to think about what an impact my money makes in the world. Really, the initiative of one young person that has driven this effort, and thanks to him that we're all here today. We're now celebrating the 2nd anniversary of the appeal, and congratulations to us for making this possible and coming together. It's now time for us to understand the facts, the science. Dr. Anne Olhoff, you are the Chief Climate Advisor at UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre. Can you please tell us what the latest findings are on global warming and that underpin this appeal?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm just going to try and show some slides. And most of what I'm going to say today is based on a report that UNEP produces every year called the Emissions Gap Report. And we produce that just in advance of the annual climate change negotiation meetings to inform negotiations about where we are, where we're headed, where we need to be, and how we can get there. And I'm going to just briefly run you through some of these issues in terms of the problem, the potential consequences, and also what needs to happen with a focus on energy and fossil fuels and transformations in investments and finance for us to get closer to limiting global warming to hopefully manageable levels. So we produce this report for a number of years, but let's jump quickly through that. So as you probably all know, climate change is caused by emissions of greenhouse gases, and this figure basically shows you the development over the past 20 years or so, 30 years actually, of all the major greenhouse gases. And what we can see from this figure, first of all, is that if we look at the fossil carbon dioxide emissions, they compose the largest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. They account for about 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. We can also see that other sources of the other emission sources are important, including methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, and they continue to increase. And we see that basically, although the pace of the increase has slowed down over the past decade or so, global emissions continue to increase, and they set a new record in 2022. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what we need, because achieving the temperature of the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, that requires unprecedented acceleration, both of mitigation action and also an unseen, historically unseen increase in ambition. So basically, this figure shows you where we're headed in terms of global emissions if we continue current policies, if countries live up to what they have promised under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then it compares those levels to where science tells us that we need to be to have a likely chance, which is at least 66%, of limiting global warming to 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. And we can see that a huge decrease in emissions is required over the next 6-7 years or so. Basically, if we compare to where we're currently headed with policies in place, we need to reduce emissions by an additional 28% by 2030 to get on track to limit global warming to 2 degrees. And we need to reduce emissions globally by 42% to get on track towards 1.5 degrees. And of course, the reason that we're working on this is that we want to limit global warming. And right now we're on track to global warming of about 3 degrees Celsius throughout this century. If countries implement what they have promised under the Paris Agreement and then continue that level of effort over the century, we get to levels of somewhere between 2.5 degrees and 2.9 degrees. And it's only if all the most stringent pledges that countries have made are fully implemented that we get somewhat more close to the goal of the Paris Agreement in terms of temperature increases. And what we can see from the right-hand side of the figure is that with every fraction of a degree, extreme events, both the intensity and the frequency of extreme events increase. So right now, we are already looking at global warming of 1.1 to 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and we can see an increase compared with before we started to really change the climate, and that will increase manyfold unless we manage to limit the emissions of greenhouse gases. And just to illustrate that this is not something that's happening in a distant future, this is just an excerpt from today. Every day we get these daily news highlights in the UN Environment Programme, and we can see that records are consistently broken every day, every week, every month, and every year. And we already see the impacts, and we know that these impacts hit the children, and they So what we need is system transformations across all systems, basically, to limit global warming and to reduce emissions. But I'm going to focus here just on the transformation of energy systems, which is absolutely essential because energy currently accounts for about 86% of global carbon dioxide emissions. And this figure shows you what happens in terms of utilizing or exploiting and depleting what's called the carbon budget, which is basically the total amount of carbon dioxide that we can ever release into the atmosphere to stay below certain levels, certain temperature thresholds. And right now we see that the coal, oil, and gas, if extracted over the lifetime of both the producing and under construction mines and fields, would emit more than 3.5 times the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees and almost deplete the entire budget for 2 degrees. So we need system-wide transformations and we need to realign the financial system to enable these transformations. If we look at finance flows and mitigation investments per sector and also by the type of economy, we need a huge increase. It's estimated by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we require investments of at least $4 to $6 trillion per year, which sounds like a lot, but if we put it in perspective and in context of, for instance, subsidies going into fossil fuels right now, it's below that level. We also see that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assesses that the mitigation investment needs to increase by a factor of 3 to 7, and also that the highest needs for the increase in investments are in developing countries. And currently, we see that investments in fossil fuels are larger than mitigation and adaptation investments combined. So we need a huge shift, and the good news is that some of these shifts are starting to happen. This figure shows you how energy investments have developed since 2015 in clean energy and in fossil fuels, and we can see that the investment levels are shifting. However, they're not shifting fast enough if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement temperature goal and limit global warming and the associated climate change impacts. So the International Energy Agency estimates that clean energy investments must be scaled up 2.5 times by the early 2030s. And the good news here again is that almost all of that required investment is in mature technologies that are tried and tested and proven successful. And at the same time, we must see that a significant decrease in investment in oil and gas supply. Basically, they need to reduce by half. And we also see that we should not have any new unabated coal plants beyond those already under construction. So this is just to set the scene for the subsequent presentations and discussions, and also to indicate the large role of climate responsible banking, and also, of course, the role both for us as individual, but all through from individuals to households to cities and to governments in really driving the changes that are needed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you so much. You know, we are at a critical point to limit emissions and prevent global warming going beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. But it's good to learn that there is indeed hope. And if we work to prevent fossil fuel expansion, we can make the right decisions now and use that lever of responsible banking, which is not yet widely enough understood. And I think that is going to be the most important outcome of today's session. It's definitely going to empower me significantly. We now have a very young person whose climate actions are moving mountains these days. And the person's name is Ellyanne Wanjiku, Africa's youngest climate finance and biodiversity champion. Ellyanne is based in Kenya and is not able to join us due to ongoing events in her country, but she has very kindly recorded this message for us last night. Can we please hear Ellyanne's message?
Jumbo. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am excited to be leading this conversation on banking responsibly as a child. together with the World Council of Churches, the United Nations Environment, and all other great partners. Whilst as children, we delivered our new Global Financial Pact Declaration Statement in Paris in June 2023 to world leaders like Emmanuel Macron. We organized and successfully launched the first ever child-led Global Children Climate Summit. We have been out taking direct action, planting trees, and influencing policymakers. We know that there is still a lot more to be done. This is why I thought that my army of children with nature, can deliver this message for you this year.
Thank you, Ellyanne, for engaging with so many high-level decision makers and world leaders to make us and we of course take a lot of motivation from you, and it sounds like your faith has really helped. And I actually personally can't wait to meet you. Now, to learn more about climate responsible financial choices, it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Usher, the head of United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. Eric, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dia, and everyone. And my congratulations to the Moral Imperative Initiative. And it's great to hear the range of perspectives from, I think, the critical issues in terms of understanding the science and the challenges you raise, and of course the inspiration and Ellyanne and others who are working to bring visibility, bring awareness, and bring pressure, I think, on the key economic actors, public and private, to help us address and keep away from the climate tipping points. I think we probably all can say that since the Paris Agreement was signed, government action has started and laid out some of the progress, but it's not ambitious enough. Within the finance sector, I think likewise, I can say that finance sector is starting to engage on these issues, but it's not fast enough. Now, if we think specifically about banks, they are certainly very central to this challenge. They play a critical role of intermediation within the economy between savers and borrowers. They have the very specific responsibility around money creation, working with the central banks in terms of trying to provide the financing for the needs of society. You know, whether that's an SME, whether that's a household, or whether that's a global corporation. In 2019, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, with 132 bank CEOs, launched together the UN Principles for Responsible Banking. And today, a little over 50% of global banking, measured by assets, are signatories to this framework. It's a framework that sets out the notion of what is responsible banking. And it's a framework that banks need to be held to and to be challenged in terms of what is your role? Are you playing a value-added role in society? Now, more recently, 145 banks, accounting big banks, so accounting about 40% of the banking industry globally, have put in place a framework called the Net Zero Banking Alliance. This sets a commitment for them to set science-based no or low overshoot targets in the 9 high-emitting sectors, with these intermediate targets starting in 2030, with aiming for net zero by 2050. They are working on these targets, and you can find online the banks and their disclosures and the targets that they are setting. I think quite importantly, this year, they have updated the guidance about how they're setting these targets, and then very importantly, they are starting to include capital markets activity, which is where a lot of the most carbon-intensive activities are today. So banks, rather than financing activities, they are advising, they are facilitating in, for instance, initial public offerings or secondary offerings or bond issuance for industries, including some carbon-intensive industries, fossil fuels and the like. And they now are starting to put in place the frameworks to say, how do we set targets to lower emissions there? We see that progress is being made, but banks need to be challenged and recognized for how this progress goes. And so I think it's quite important to look at their actions and to both not necessarily vilify, but credit where credit is due, and then challenge where more is needed. And I think also to build the interlinkage between the role of the banks, the role of the finance community, and the other key actors, including civil society and governments. Because as we know, finance on its own does not fill a policy void, but finance certainly can be used to help enable a transition. And we need to make sure that the incentives, the alignment, the pressures are pointed all in the right direction. With that, I hand it back to you. Looking forward to any questions.
Thank you, Eric. You've really helped us understand the role which we as clients of banks and pension funds play. And then the UNEP case study from the Middle East illustrates the urgency of client engagement. I'm delighted now to introduce you all to a young child's rights expert from Sierra Leone, who is 19 years old and who was a part of his country's delegation at the last UN climate conference in Dubai. Foday Bangura, what do your banking choices have to do with the mental health of young people? Please help us all understand.
Thank you very much, Thea. Greetings, esteemed faith leaders, fellow speakers, and distinguished guests. As Thea said, my name is Foday Bangura, and I have been a child rights advocate since I was 10, which is over 8 years of experience now. So I'm calling from Sierra Leone, and one of the things today is that I'm not speaking as an expert. I'm speaking as a young person that is concerned with the mental health states of young people around the world because of the climate crisis. But I am using the fact of sharing my own story today to illustrate how it affects young people. So growing up, and I had no idea, of course, of what societal and ecological collapse might look like. And for that, my concerns involved back then figuring out where to go to college, what career I want to pursue, and how to best live a healthy and fulfilling life, especially since I was born in a very, very poor home. So I had heard, of course, about climate change, and we all had at some point, but I never expected it to someday consume my every waking moment. And it has now shaped my entire life. And I live out of fury of our situation. And it feels like more I learn about the climate emergency, the more dire the situation becomes. And initially, this knowledge, first of all, led to anger, which caused me to act for a while. And I actually failed to realize the extreme mental and emotional toll this work involves. And constantly, I used to think and talk about the end of the world, trying to reconcile, of course, with the slow rate of progress that all of our actions have not been fortunately giving us the required results that we are looking for as young people. And of course, I've been desperately trying to find ways to beg through my advocacy at different levels. And of course, eventually, as time goes on, it becomes easier to me because I started being numb instead of being angry at what I see and the less action that is being taken by people around the world. So I want to ask everyone here today some questions. And I want these questions to be reflected on as we go to bed at night. Why should we as young people not be scared when we understand global warming and the scientific facts shared by UNEP and especially earlier? And why should we not be scared when we experience the impact in our communities? And why should we not be scared when our banks and financial institutions put us at risk by investing trillions of dollars into new fossil fuels projects, doing exactly the opposite to what the IPCC says is needed for human survival? And no matter what our world is being forced to change, climate chaos will crumble several institutions and the basic functions of our society that we take for granted. Let us all put our hands together to accelerate climate solutions by banking responsibly. And please, I beg of you, if you do not remember anything from what I have said or what the previous speakers and the next speakers will say, please remember this of my saying. Bank responsibly to protect young people's rights to a healthy environment. And our future depends on your money. I thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Foday, for directing your anger into action and for asking the questions that you have and making this appeal that you have. What you just described is also documented by the study published by the Lancet, showing that over 75% of children globally suffer from the currently inadequate responses to global warming. Therefore, it is vital that we understand how to turn our motivation into practical action. Our next speaker, Rosie Venner, is from Just Money Movement, an ecumenical organization in the United Kingdom connecting faith, money, and justice. Rosie, could you please tell us more about how you support faith actors to take practical steps towards climate responsible banking?
Thank you very much, Dia, and thank you to Frederique for the invitation to contribute to this important conversation. Frederique asked if I would share the story of a campaign action we're currently working on with churches together in Britain and Ireland, Make My Money Matter and other allies. Just to put this action in context, there's a growing movement of individuals, churches and Christian charities in the UK concerned about the activities of the big banks that dominate the banking sector in the UK. The latest Banking on Climate Chaos report found that 5 UK lenders, Barclays, HSBC, Standard Chartered, Lloyds and NatWest, channeled almost £39 billion of new money into fossil fuels in 2023 alone. And this was an increase on the previous year. So we recognise the urgency with which we need to take action. And many churches have made divestment commitments in their investments and are working towards net zero carbon targets and are starting to see the relevance of their banking choices too. So at Just Money Movement, we work to educate and equip Christians and congregations in the UK to take action with their own finances and to campaign for financial and economic system change. And we're part of a wider movement within and beyond the churches that see the need for change in the banking sector. And we use a variety of tactics to seek that change, from shareholder engagement and AGM activism to grassroots training and support. The particular story I wanted to share today came about as a collaboration with Make My Money Matter, an organisation which has run some high-profile campaigns aiming to move the trillions of pounds in UK pensions and banks out of destructive, harmful investments into cleaner, greener businesses. They work with a number of different movements across civil society, and we're really keen to partner with churches to help amplify faith voices calling for change. So with the support of Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, which is our ecumenical structure that brings together churches to work towards closer unity, we're working together on an ecumenical statement of concern with signatories from a wide range of churches, from local congregations through to the denominations themselves, that will be addressed to our big 5 banks calling for action on their fossil fuel financing. We're just starting this piece of work. We'll be gathering signatories and support over the summer, and then launching the statements at the beginning of October to coincide with the end of the season of creation and the beginning of Good Money Week, which is an awareness week in the UK that promotes greener, fairer financial choices. Our statement of concern has 3 demands for those banks. to end new finance and financial services to new clients involved in fossil fuel expansion, to put existing fossil fuel clients on notice that they must end fossil fuel expansion or risk losing financial services. And if existing clients fail to end their expansion plans, that banks should exit those relationships. So we hope that this really bold statement will also commit signatories to continue to publicly voice our concern and explore other banking options wherever possible. So when this statement launches in October, we'll be seeking media coverage in faith and secular press, encouraging actions amongst the churches locally, and seeking meetings and ongoing engagement with the banks. And we'll also be signposting to resources that will equip individuals and churches to move their money. We produce a guide every year, a greener, fairer banking guide that helps local churches that want to switch to an ethical bank. And we look at some of the ethical and greener options. And we're fortunate in the UK that there's a small but growing sector of greener fossil fuel-free banks whose work we want to champion. But we're also aware that it's not simply enough to equip churches to switch away from the big banks. That can be a really important and prophetic witness. And it means that we can speak out with more integrity, knowing that our finances are aligned with our climate commitments. But we also need to see significant policy changes from the banks that dominate the sector, from those mainstream banks. We want to work towards a world where all banks are putting people and planet first, where all banks are serving the common good. And to do that, we need to change the narrative of what banks are for, what the finance sector is for, so that mainstream finance helps shape a climate-safe world for future generations. And I'll finish there and just add that although the work I've spoken about today in this example is focused on growing and equipping the movement of churches in Britain and Ireland, advocating for change in the banking sector in our context, we'd be really happy to share learning and resources with others who want to take similar action. And I'm really encouraged by today's event to hear and learn from that work that is already underway globally. And it gives me lots of hope for the future.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It's amazing to see how much churches and partners are achieving by joining forces in the UK. And, you know, we've shared the chat in the chat a template of this letter, and I can't wait to use it, which of course we can all use to engage with our banks, and it can be done in just 10 minutes. A guide with more resources will be shared as well at the end of our event. But now it's time to see what questions or observations have come up from the participants, and I think about how faith can help us stop the still ongoing increase of CO2 emissions that threatens our children's lives. I see we have one participant from Canada, Anne Keary, who would like to share her experience. Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Dia, and thank you to the organisers of this incredibly important webinar on responsible climate finance. My name's Anne Keary. I'm originally from Australia, but I now live in Toronto, Canada. And in 2018, when the IPCC report came out concerning the importance of absolutely limiting global warming to 1.5, my daughter told me we have to do something big on climate. And I have supported the student climate strikes. But in addition to that, I went to another talk in which we were told that our own personal biggest carbon footprint was not necessarily in our houses, if we are fortunate to have a house, or in our cars, but in our banking accounts and in our pension accounts. So with that knowledge, my husband and I decided that we had to take our money out of RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada. The Royal Bank of Canada is Canada's biggest funder of fossil fuel projects. They have increased their funding of fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement. And they also fund projects here in Canada which violate the rights of Indigenous peoples. So we decided we could absolutely no longer be complicit in this. And we went to the bank and met with our bank account manager and handed him a copy of the Banking on Climate Chaos report. He had actually no idea that his bank was funding fossil fuel projects to this extent, but part of our purpose there was to convey the message to him so that he would convey that up the line. So we did take our money out, and we now have our money in a credit union. And I am continuing as a member of For Our Kids, which is a parent-led organization advocating for climate justice, to advocate to other parents to do this action as well for our children's sake. We absolutely need to be moving our finances and our money out of banks, which are funding the breakdown of climate systems, which are crucial to our children's futures. And I'd like to thank the testimony in particular of the young people here today, alerting us to this. So thank you again for this incredibly important webinar.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you for leading with action. It's deeply inspiring. We have time now just for one or two more questions and interventions. I'm going to share one of the questions that has been shared with me. And then, Frederique, maybe you could help guide on who could answer that question. Or...
Yes, let's hear the question and we'll see who's best placed to answer.
We have a lot of messages that have come in the chat box. I'm just queuing it back to the question that we received. Iyad, would you be able to share the question again with me, please? That would really help. We have a lot of comments in the box. Okay. Okay, I think I have this from John Mohead. The UBS had that bought Credit Suisse that you referred to, Frederique. It is the world's biggest wealth manager and 10th biggest fossil bank. Recently, UBS has engaged in massive greenwashing exercises and shows no willingness to get out of fossil fuels. What can we do to put pressure on UBS to stop its financing of fossil fuels expansion? I think this is a question that would be common for all of us. I think we all need to understand, apart from the fact that we have access to this very, very pertinent letter, the template of it, what else can we do to put pressure on banks to stop the financing of fossil fuels expansion?
Yes, and I would suggest Eric Usher, if you would like to maybe give some advice or suggestions as the head of UNEP FI.
Thanks. I cannot make comments on specific banks. What I can do is give general comments. I think further to my comments earlier, I think it's very important to distinguish, credible actions from, those that are not credible, maybe are greenwashing. And we cannot paint with a broad brush. Now, largely big banks are reflections of the economy where they operate. And it's true that it's possible for banks to show leadership, and this is what we hope, and this is what pressure can help. But Anne Olhoff spoke to the emissions gap report, some of the data. I think it's quite important to look at the production gap report, was another important document which shows, and I think one of the things we see is that the production gap report looks at government fossil fuel exploration plans. And unfortunately, it paints a fairly negative picture on a number of Western governments, not only, but largely. And there is some correlation between governments who are not providing clear signals on the future of fossil fuels in their economy and the banks who operate in those economies. So I think the pressure is required on the banks. The pressure is also required on governments and how the two fit together. Governments are, in some cases, coming out with regulations around preventing greenwashing, and we believe that that's quite useful. The UK most recently has issued some requirements, and therefore banks who are announcing that they have set targets, let's say on net zero, that they are held to account to exactly show the actions they're taking and essentially the transition plans they're putting in place and how they're going to get there. So the pressure is ratcheting up. I think, as I mentioned, I believe that there is progress in some places, but once again, it's not fast enough. And I think the role of key stakeholders, including civil society, is very important, and including investors, particularly faith investors, is very important to help banks see that it's in their interest to be really financing the needs of society and accelerating action here.
Thank you, Eric. We have one more question from Dinesh Suna. I'm going to quickly ask this question because it's something that even I think about all the time. And I think Anne should be able to answer this best, given that she's, she knows the science. Dinesh asks, can we still be flying, driving, basically living the way we are, primarily driving the fossil fuel economy? Are we ready for drastic lifestyle changes, including saying no to all modes of fossil fuel-driven lifestyle and not only questioning the banks who invest on fossil fuel? This is a conundrum that I am confronted by just as much as I think every one of us is. And Anne, please answer this question for us. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Anne had to leave. So I would like to comment, however, that Antonio Guterres has also made an appeal 2 weeks ago to stop fossil fuel advertisement, because that often creates a very high demand for unessential fossil fuel products. And the International Energy Agency has been very clearly documenting that there is no need for new drilling and that there is enough fossil fuel out of the ground to cover the transition to renewable energy. So my answer to that would be yes, we all have to make efforts on our lifestyle, but we have to be careful also how our demand is increased through aggressive advertisement for non-essential fossil fuel products. So much from my end.
And the only thing I would add to that would be, I think, so long as each of us is making the effort and the attempt to live more sustainably and consciously, and directing now, which is very clearly evidenced through the session, how we use our money, we will be contributing to significant change. I'm now going to take this forward, and we're very, very grateful for everyone for your engagement, and I hope we can continue to keep this session as interactive as possible. And of course, all your questions will be reviewed again towards the end of this second section that we're getting into, and we will make every effort to answer your questions. And if there are any questions that are unanswered, we will email you with our responses. Please drop your questions with your email IDs. In the second part of our event today, we will look at the fast evolving legal landscape, which gives hope for our children's future, and which asset owners and asset managers and banks need to be aware of. We have the great honor to have with us today Andrew Raine, the Deputy Director of UNEP's Law Division. Andrew will tell us what the new trends in climate litigation are and how is that relevant for banking.
Thank you very, very much, dear. I'm just going to share my screen. So again, thank you to the organizers for this invitation to this important discussion. As Dia mentioned, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about one of the levers of change, and that is litigation. And globally, we have seen I call it a tsunami of action in this space, where we are seeing banks, other finance actors, and then also other actors in the chain of responsibility to take action on climate, governments, corporations in particular, to address the climate crisis. So I'd like to do two things. The first is to give you a very high-level overview of where we are in terms of climate litigation. We're lucky to have a couple more speakers that will follow this presentation that will give some specific examples. So I won't go into details, but I just want to give you the big picture. And then secondly, to zero in a little bit on some of the trends we're seeing when it comes to litigation against banks and other financial institutions. In UNEP, we publish every 3 years a report. It's an important report. because what it does is it gives a global overview of the key trends in climate litigation, the numbers in particular, and the causes of action that are being brought by actors. And when I say actors, I mean civil society organizations, governments, young people around the world, trying to bring more accountability to this issue. In terms of the numbers, the headline message here is that there has been a tsunami of litigation. Back in 2017, when we started tracking this, there were approximately 800 to 900 cases. Fast forward to today, and there's over 2,600 cases. The other key part of the numbers is that not only has there been this acceleration in the curve of cases, but we've seen a broadening of the jurisdictions in which we find these cases. Most of the cases have been in one jurisdiction, the United States, with well over 1,000 cases. I think it's 1,522, as you can see on the slides there. And then the rest in the other jurisdictions of the world. But we're seeing over time more cases happening in the developing countries of the world, more cases happening in other major fossil fuel heavy jurisdictions such as Australia and the UK. And you can see some of the numbers there on the graphs in front of you. I won't repeat them, but the headline message again is that the cases are increasing at a quick rate, over 2,600 cases. You can see the distribution there in terms of jurisdiction. What I'd like to quickly do, though, is talk about, well, what are the main categories of cases? What threads could we weave through this story? And in our report, our most recent report that we published last year, we identified 6 key categories of climate litigation cases. These are the causes of action, or the main pockets of where we see litigation. And the first trend that we see, or category, is the use of human rights. Now, many of you will know that the world took a very, very important step forward very recently, last year, with the adoption of the General Assembly's resolution recognizing for the first time at the universal level a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Now, this is not a new right. It is woven into the legal frameworks of over 160 countries, either in constitutions or in national legislation or in treaty commitments. But we now have elevated it to the General Assembly, and we're starting to see courtrooms around the world use this basis of a human right to a healthy environment as a cause of action in compelling defendants to use this right for action. The second category of cases is against governments, and these are the most common cases, I should say, in climate change litigation. And essentially what that is looking to do is to compel governments to live up to the commitments that they have made under the Paris Agreement, under the UNFCCC, and other relevant legal agreements. The third is what we call keeping fossil fuels in the ground. And these are various cases brought against not only governments, but also carbon majors and their financiers to seek to stop or otherwise impact oil and gas projects that would have alleged to have caused climate impact. And then the fourth is on corporate cases, and particularly cases against corporates, seeking them to live up to their responsibilities. Under international law, the responsibilities sit firmly on the shoulders of states, but we've seen an extension of that responsibility to seek to allege responsibility towards corporations, and particularly the big carbon majors. And there have been important steps forward in that space. Eric mentioned greenwashing. This is another accelerating area of liability or accountability for corporations, governments even, but also banks. And there's been a couple of cases brought against banks alleging that their claims are misleading, and then that triggers greenwashing liability, either under legislation or under advertising standards boards, or even under securities regulators have their own requirements on the quality and accuracy of disclosures. So another very important head of cases. And then finally on adaptation. Most of the focus to date in climate litigation has been on trying to reduce the size of the problem, trying to reduce emissions through the law. But as we all know, we're living with climate change now, and adapting to climate change is as important. And there are now a body of cases seeking to compel governments and others to take action to adapt to climate change. Here is a slide that shares some of the key trends that we are seeing in the cases. I've mentioned some of them already, but I just wanted to focus on one of them there, the backlash cases. What we are very worried about, and we report this in our climate change report, is that those bringing the cases are experiencing backlash. And we've seen that with youth, we've seen that with NGOs, and it's a worrying trend because climate litigation is important for holding governments and others to account. It's helping implement commitments. It's not doing anything nefarious. So just quickly, I want to focus a little bit on well, what are the cases against banks? And again, you're going to hear a couple of examples, so I won't go into details. But I want to make the point that we're seeing more cases against financial institutions relating to the climate dimensions of their portfolios and investments. These claims are being brought by different actors, NGOs, private individuals, regulatory and administrative bodies. And it's impossible to put them into clean-cut categories, but my reading is that there are three main cases that we're starting to see already. The greenwashing cases, or four, I should say, human rights cases, cases concerning access to information and disclosure obligations, and then fiduciary and other duty type cases. So just to give you a very high level overview, greenwashing, I mentioned that. Essentially, we're talking here about when a bank misrepresents its sustainability credentials or its products or its activities. And there's a couple of cases as examples I've given there. One in Australia, where the ad standards body took action against HSBC regarding an advertisement it had regarding the Great Barrier Reef. There's another action that's ongoing that was brought by ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, against Vanguard Investments regarding to the integrity of its disclosures around a green bond investment. There are cases around a duty of care that banks may have under a particular jurisdiction. You're going to hear in the next presentation or the one after it, the case against BNP Paribas. There is a case against the European Investment Bank as well. I won't go into the details, but the thrust of these cases is that in some jurisdictions, there is a particular duty. It could be a duty of vigilance, it could be a duty of care on banks and their directors to undertake their activities in a way that is consistent with that duty, be it a fiduciary duty or some other duty baked into law. The third category I have there is on disclosure frameworks. There have been cases against banks wanting to see the books, for example, in Abrahams and Commonwealth against the CBA, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, a successful action was brought against that bank, seeking access to its internal decision-making documentation about why it had invested into various oil and gas projects, and was this consistent with its own policies on climate investments. And the fourth category there is on human rights. As I mentioned, the landscape, the international landscape around human rights has shifted, and there is this accelerating solidification of the human right to a healthy environment. And we've seen various actions brought against corporates and now banks alleging potential violations of global human rights rules if they finance certain projects that may be deemed to have a negative climate impact. So let me stop there, other than to say this is an important lever of change, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you especially for mentioning how important it is to protect litigators and support them in the important work they're doing. It sounds like the law is on our side, and it also sounds like banks really must start considering the legal implications of their actions. But what we're all wondering is, how can these legal options be implemented in practice? And here to give us an example is Megan Clay from ClientEarth. Megan, over to you. I'm really looking forward to listening to this.
Well, thank you very much, Dia. And thank you very much to Frederique and to the organisers for inviting me along today. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and to be talking to you about a complaint that ClientEarth brought against Saudi Aramco and its financiers to the UN human rights experts. So by way of a brief introduction, I am a lawyer at ClientEarth. I lead the accountable finance team, and previously I worked at an international commercial law firm. But before we start, a very quick introduction to ClientEarth for those of you who don't know us. We are a global environmental NGO. We are formed of lawyers, and we have a mission to use the law to address climate change and protect nature. So we work across the life cycle of the law, from advocacy and engagement with policymakers to legal actions to hold governments, corporations, also financial institutions to account. And we have 300 staff across offices in Europe, China, Japan, and the US. And now to the complaint. So I'm excited to tell you about the complaint for all kinds of reasons around its connections with climate litigation more broadly, but actually a load of that work has just been done. So thank you very much, Andy. And I'm just going to tell you today a little bit about what we did, what happened, and why we think it's important, very briefly. So the first thing is, what's all this about? So in short, in 2021, ClientEarth made a complaint to the UN Special Procedures about Saudi Aramco and its financiers in the context of climate change. So breaking that down, the UN Special Procedures are independent human rights experts. Some of them are here on your slide, on your screens. And they are mandated by UN member states to interpret and promote international human rights law. So they act on complaints of violations of human rights law by sending communications to states and also to businesses. So importantly, they're not a court. So their communications are not judgments or court orders, but their work can have a significant influence on how courts and other actors interpret and apply human rights law. So the complaint itself was made in 2021, and it was made against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, its national oil company, Aramco, plus its major financiers, so including 10 major global banks in the US, UK, France, and Japan. And we alleged that the parties to the complaint were not complying with human rights laws, more specifically the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So we alleged that Aramco's fossil fuel expansion business plans will see it increasingly contribute to human rights harms through its emissions and also through its advertising. We allege that Aramco's failure to reduce its emissions and its failure to transition its business means that it is failing to address its impact on human rights, violating those UN guiding principles. And we also alleged, importantly for this conversation, that the banks supporting Aramco are at serious risk of violating their own human rights responsibilities under the UN guiding principles. And without going into the technical details of this, because we don't have very much time, we said that the adverse human rights impacts connected to climate change are very well known. And so banks and other financial businesses cannot claim to be ignorant of them. We said that the banks involved had continued to provide support to Saudi Aramco, a business clearly causing these kinds of climate impacts over a number of years. And we said that the banks had limited scope for credibly exerting leverage over the business, given the robust financial position of Saudi Aramco and also its importance to the Saudi state. And we also said that those banks hadn't terminated their relationships with the business. And we said that for all of those reasons, the banks were likely to be contributing to Saudi Aramco's adverse human rights impacts, and so were non-compliant with their responsibilities to respect human rights. So what happened next? Oh, go to that one. So in June 2023, the UN Special Procedures issued communications to Aramco, to 13 financial businesses, some of the banks that I just mentioned, the Saudi government, plus the governments of the financial businesses' home states, so the US, the UK, France, and Japan. And in these communications, the experts informed the banks of their belief that Aramco's business activities run contrary to the goals, obligations, and commitments under the Paris Agreement, and which are adversely impacting the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change. More generally, they also expressed their most serious concerns regarding the adverse impacts on human rights caused by activities such as the exploration of fossil fuels, which contribute to climate change. So critically, the experts also confirmed that a bank or other financial business can move from being directly linked to an adverse human rights impact to contributing to that impact if it doesn't take action to prevent or mitigate the business relationship to which it's directly linked. And the UN experts concluded that therefore the alleged involvement of the financial institutions in the financing of Aramco's activities could be in violation of international human rights law and standards. Now, in the communications, the experts then asked a series of questions about each bank's response to the complaint. And I can tell you that a year or so on, nearly a year on, 6 out of 10 banks have responded to those requests. The US banks did not. Though these broadly, perhaps disappointingly, referred back to existing financing and human rights policies rather than engaging with the particular detail of the communications themselves. So I'm going to pause there. I've told you what happened. I've told you a little bit about the communications. And I'll just leave you with a short thought about what I want to say about it, which is that these warning letters are interesting because they break new ground. So this is the first time that the UN has acted on an oil major's human rights responsibilities for climate change under the guiding principles on business and human rights. So making that link between business and human rights, or against the backers of the financial backers of oil and gas expansion. And we've already seen this development integrated into more hard-edged court procedures, for example, in Holland. So I think lots of exciting developments. Some of those have just been alluded to, and hopefully this development can slot into the tsunami of litigation that is underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. While you were talking, we shared the link to the letter in the chat. If any of you participants happen to be in a bank that is financing Saudi Aramco, you can support this effort by writing to them as a bank client who cares about children. Next, we'll hear from, please pardon me if I don't pronounce this right, but I'm going to make my effort to. We will hear from François de Cambiaire. Did I say that?
Perfectly right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An attorney who is a specialist on legal action with a focus on banks. Over to you, François.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be there and to take part to this very important initiative. I will try to share my screen quickly. I try to keep it short anyway, because I have only 3 minutes to give you an overview of the world's first climate litigation against a bank. And this is 100 pages writ of summons that has been delivered to BNP Paribas. So we'll keep with a very broad overview. First, as I said, it's the first climate lawsuit against a commercial bank. And as we already said, it is only the beginning of climate litigating against financial institutions, but there is a movement ongoing with another case in the Netherlands, for example. BNP Paribas, and it's very consistent to talk after you, Megan, because BNP Paribas was the largest financer of Saudi Aramco. And globally, between 2016 and 2022, BNP Paribas, the biggest French bank, was the world's leading financer of the carbon majors in the world, and the 5th worldwide funder of fossil fuel expansion, according to the Banking on Climate Chaos. So it makes it a very important case, not only from French perspective, but also from a global perspective with regard to the efforts that have to be made to curb the financing of fossil fuels. After years of discussions with the banks, the 3 NGOs, French NGOs, Notre Affaire à tous, Les Amis de la Terre, and Oxfam, decided to took the banks to the courts because discussions was not efficient. So we delivered a formal notice in October 2022, asking the bank to comply with its due diligence obligations on climate-related risks. And the bank answered back and denied to comply with the measures that we asked. We were requesting to be compliant with the objective of limiting the climate change to 1.5 degrees. So in February, the NGOs brought BNP Paribas to the court, to the French civil court, on 3 legal grounds, which is interesting because, as we said, the legal ground and the duty of vigilance, or we could also say due diligence obligation, was adopted last year with the new CSDDD directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which will cover all the European countries. So it could be duplicated in other jurisdictions for sure. We are also relying on the provisions relating to the prevention of ecological damage, and bouncing on Eric's remarks before, we are also acting to evidence and to demonstrate that BNP Paribas, which is a member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, is breaching its commitments within this alliance to be carbon neutral in 2050, which can also be duplicated in other jurisdictions. I just want to highlight that we are in a very comparable case with the Shell case, the winning case against the carbon major Shell, based on very large principle do not harm. And by financing and by refusing to stop financing oil and gas expansion, you are hurting and you are contributing to dangerous climate change for humanity. Quickly, but you can get into details afterwards. I will share my presentation. The figures, $187 billion of total financing from BNP on the period just after the Paris Agreement. And as you can see in pink, in 2023, after the delivery of the writ of summons, BNP curbed its financing to fossil fuels. I don't have time to get into details of the demand, but you could look afterwards. And very, very quickly, 2 words. At this point, we didn't have judicial response. We are still in the course of procedural incidents, etc., etc. French proceeding is very long. But my point is different. My point is that strategic litigation, and especially against financial institutions, can also have indirect results and indirect outcomes that are even more important than winning in front of the court, which can take years and which is uncertain. But since the case was brought in last year, in May 2023, and this year, BNP Paribas made very important announcements refraining from participating in new bond issuance in the oil and gas sector, and announcing that they were stopping all financing of projects, which means direct financial support, which is only a minor part, but which is already a great outcome. Of course, it is still enough, and this is the reason why the organizations are continuing to the lawsuit against BNP, but it takes time, and it might also include discussions at some point, which is a good way to improve compliance with climate accountability of the bank. And at this point, 2 last things to highlight. The bank recognized that there is a problem with lending money to fossil fuels developers, and that the main request we are asking, stopping and phasing out the financing to fossil fuels. They just recognize this is true, this is needed, and this was said by the CEO of the bank, Jean-Laurent Bonnafé. And we can expect some systemic effects to other French banks and to other international banks. I don't have time to get into details regarding what is still at stake, but there are still some problems, and the question is very complex. Even when you speak about phasing out of or abandoning fossil fuel financing, there are still room for financing, giving general money to carbon majors, because the bank, BNP, stops only to finance the specialized players, the pure players of fossil fuel industry, which is obviously not enough. Last point, we already talked about with Anne, with the very, very precise provisions of the H-leg report, which is setting very precise measures for financial institutions to be compliant with the 1.5 objective of limiting the rise of temperature. I want to say a last word that on the fact that the European Central Bank also stepped up with great efforts to enforce the management of climate-related and environmental risks by the European banks. And during this year, at the end of 2023, and very soon in May, the ECB announced that she was about to sanction 4 banks. Initially, 18 banks was targeting for not complying with the expectation from the European regulation body regarding climate change, and especially the Fit for 55, which is, do you comply, and are you ready to and are you from a financial perspective sufficiently solid and stable to support the transition of the economy towards the reduction by 2030 of 55% of the GHG emissions, according to the Green New Deal. So let's see, because for the moment, there are 2 American banks, 1 Italian, 1 German. The names were not released and made public at this time, but let's see. And for sure, because they are facing some important financial penalties, which can amount up to 5% of the average income of the banks, for sure, this kind of enforcement by the regulators and this kind of strategic litigation, such as the BNP case, the ING case brought by Milieu Defensie in the Netherlands, for sure. And let's hope that it can bring accountability from the finance sector. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, François. That was, so insightful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. And sorry for requesting you to keep it short. We do have a few more speakers left. We're almost towards the end of our webinar. And all of you have been so engaging, and it's been so wonderful to see your questions coming in. We will be answering some of these questions before we end the session today. But before we get into that, I think it's important to recognize the fact that to be able to exercise legal options is becoming extremely important to save children's lives, and and something that faith actors and partners can and must consider. Based on the last 3 speakers, we have some important points to reflect on. How can we hold our banks accountable for the harms caused to children and young people? Before we take questions, I know there's one participant who's keen to make a contribution. Bach Lam is a UN Youth Ambassador who collaborated in the development of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child's new General Comment 26. Bach Lam, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and to the organizers for hosting this very important event today. I'm Bach, and I advise the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child on a document called General Comment number 26, and I will be talking about it soon. So, as an expert has just mentioned, how the UN has recently adopted that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. As children are also humans and the future of the world, we should not neglect children's environmental rights. To hold banks accountable for the harms that they have caused to children, you can refer to the General Comment number 26. This is an authoritative guide to 196 UN countries on children's environmental rights. This is a UN document that's made with children and for children. Government, business, and banks of these countries are required to take account for children's environmental rights in any of their actions. To fail to do so is to violate the GC26 terms they have ratified to. And so, to children and adults, if you find that your government or banks in your country is not protecting children's environmental rights, you can use the GC26 to question their acts and take legal actions. The GC26 has specific sections on children's environmental rights in relation to business and finance to ensure that businesses, including banks, are held accountable. An example is financial institutions are required to carry assessments to ensure children's environmental rights won't be violated at any point. They have to reduce their emission contributions, and developed nations should collaborate with developing nations to aid climate change combat. There are 2 versions of them. There will be the official document and the child-friendly version. So if you wish to share this to your children or a school, then you can use the child-friendly version, which is a summary of the official document. If you prefer the legal, the official document, then please find the legal document in the chat. So please refer to them for a better understanding on upholding children's environmental rights and holding your banks accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Bach Lam. Thank you for working on the General Common 26 and for tirelessly contributing towards climate action. I'm definitely deeply inspired by you. And I'm sure everybody will be grateful to have access to the General Common 26. We have now, do we still have time to take 2 questions, or should we carry on with that?
One.
Let's pick one. Let me, okay, so I have the privilege of doing that. So I shall pick one question. Okay. Hesben Omondi has asked us, I am interested in understanding how we can ensure that our investments truly align with our mission of empowering youth. Can you provide guidance on how to identify and monitor genuinely impactful and sustainable investment options beyond the usual greenwashing tactics? And who should we get to answer this question?
I think Maurice will actually answer the question in his intervention. So perhaps you can
just lead it to Maurice's intervention. We have come to the end of our webinar. We have a tool to share with all of you to take away and implement as individuals or as organizations, and to introduce this tool and help us look forward to the next steps. It's my pleasure to introduce a representative from one of the co-organizers, the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, JLI, Maurice Bloem is the interim CEO of one of the JLI and is also Chief Sustainability Officer at the Church World Service. Maurice, over to you. I hope you will answer this question that has been asked and leave us with a very, very critical and rich resource that I think we can all benefit greatly from.
Thank you, Dia. No pressure, right? So thank you for providing me the time to say a couple of things. Yeah, esteemed colleagues, fellow advocates, we are almost to the end of this important webinar. Gratitude to the World Council of Churches and UNEP, Dia for moderating this event, and each of you for your commitment to this crucial cause. Today's discussions have underscored a profound truth. The climate emergency represents one of the greatest threats to children's lives and future generation. The stark reality that fossil fuels contribute to over 75% of global green gas emissions highlights the urgent need for action. So here it comes. I'm excited to share with you the vital resource, the Survival Guide on Climate Responsible Banking, available both on the World Council of Churches website as well as my organization's JLI resource library, written by Frederique and Jody. The guide provides practical steps for engaging with financial service providers to cease investment in fossil fuels and adopt more sustainable practices. So what are the steps that you can take? Send a letter. Evaluate your bank's climate policies using a search engine tools like Laudato Si Movement search engine or the Bank Green. Switch your bank. Share your commitment. Engage with financial providers. And, last but not least, spread the word. So these actions are not just steps towards a sustainable future, but are also crucial moral imperatives to safeguard the lives and futures of our children. I would also like to take this opportunity that while holding financial institutions accountable is really crucial. I think, I hope that we all understood that by these excellent presentations that we listened to today. And changing them is an important aspect of the system changes that we need. But I also would like us to remind us that we must also take these type of opportunities to reflect on our own roles. Systemic changes require us to develop the necessary knowledge, skills, abilities as individuals as well as communities to develop skills like critical thinking, trust, empathy. And I really think that faith-based organization can play an important role here. I would like to refer you to the innerdevelopmentgoals.org, because I really think that connection between planet and humanity is really of importance. Of course, I would like to talk about my own organization as well, JLI. JLI works at the nexus of religion and development, decolonizing knowledge management and empowering local leadership to create just, sustainable, and equitable development practices. So very important within this discussion as well. The other organization I work for, Church World Service, I think that's also an important lesson. We developed a climate, environment, and sustainability policy. And our policy calls for 3 aspects of sustainability. 1, environmental stewardship. 2 is economic vitality. And 3 is social equity. And those are guiding our efforts to address climate crisis responsibility and justly. By embedding sustainability at the core of our mission, we aim for the same accountability we seek for, from financial institutions, although to be honest, we still are not there yet. So today's commitments and actions are part of a broader movement towards systemic change, requiring both institutional accountability as well as individual action. We must consider insights from initiatives like the Earth for All initiatives, and emphasizing the need for degrowth and integrating both inner and outer dimension of systemic change. Sustainable changes hinges not only on material interventions, but also on addressing the deep collective structures of thought that underpin our failing systems. By nurturing the inner capacities necessary to overcome barriers to collective actions, we can foster the profound transformation required to avoid ecological and societal collapse. So let me close with this. Let these 3 things be our rallying call: to act with urgency, to advocate with passion, and to steward our financial choices in a way that honors and protects the most vulnerable among us, our children. Again, thank you for your participation, dedication, and unwavering commitment to this critical cause. Let's go forth and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maurice Bloem. And a huge thanks also to Jody Salter from JLI, whose expertise has been instrumental. So we are thrilled about the great collaboration of JLI in this endeavor. And there are important next steps I want to announce to all of you, dear participants. We are going to start a capacity building initiative for climate litigation with focus on financial actors in September. Are you interested in learning how to use the law for intergenerational justice? Well, then please contact us and we can include you in the upcoming trainings. Now, a huge thanks to Iyad Abu Moghli and his team at UNEP for developing the Climate Responsible Finance Initiative with us since 2022. Many thanks to our amazing speakers and all participants for your ongoing and upcoming efforts to save children's lives. Thank you so much, dear Mirza, for being our Master of Ceremony today, and for all your engagement for children's future. Now back to you for the final closing.
What can I say? As I said right at the start, I'm looking forward to this session because I believed that I would gain a lot from it and learn so much from it, and I truly have. Every speaker has added so much more perspective and insight into a subject that could have been very, very difficult to understand and comprehend. So I want to thank the speakers for making the language so simple and accessible enough for, a layperson like me to understand. And I'm very grateful for all the access that we now have to the resources and the knowledge that will help us direct our own individual actions and efforts to making the banking system responsible. And I would also like to thank everyone. And I hope that we can use and broadly share the survival guide that we have access to now and use our individual power as bank clients to protect our children. Thank you so much for making me a part of this effort. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for joining. Namaste.